Hi, I'm Tom Kehr, Systems Designer and Trainer here at Exertis Almo. And with me today is Chuck Wilson, Chief Executive Officer Emeritus at NSCA. And what we're discussing is legislation and the low voltage contractor. This relates to the licensing and permit requirements needed by the low voltage contractor so they can perform work on site, like pulling and terminating cable. So let's start with some context. We are traditionally known as low voltage contractors and integrators, and what really defines low voltage?
Yeah. Hi, everyone. Tom, thanks for having me. That term low voltage is really misleading because it's really limited energy. So there is no standards or universally agreed upon voltage levels. What we all agree on is the power consumption as really determined by the load and the distance and the current draw and other factors that define safe levels of voltage that can be used in power over Ethernet and audio output circuits and stuff. So the current NEC defines our work more as class 2 and class 3 circuits. And so basically these limited energy circuits are defined within the code to be deemed safe from shock hazards and generating heat that would compromise the insulation or create a fire hazard or whatever. So many factors goes into it: conductor size, loads, distance, the type of bundling we do. All of it goes into that, and we have all these codes and compliance factors that our committee members meet about, and our code making people that serve on these code making panels, they help establish what those parameters are. So the low voltage term really isn't relevant compared to the limited energy that we use.
Yeah, and that's one of the things I run across because the NEC does not define low voltage.
Right,
They
right,
do call it limited energy circuits, the
right,
class 2, class 3.
right.
Um,
And that's what we're trying to get to as well, is that it just depends on the voltage level would be dependent on the current draw. So it's hard to say what that is.
okay, you mentioned class 2, class 3. Where does class 4 fit into this? Article 726, which is new with the 2023 version of the NEC.
Yeah. So hold on. So that's what we've been doing. So it's pretty evident that the entire chapter 8 is going to go away, and we're going to start looking at the work of the integrator being encompassing of class 2, class 3, and class 4. So with all of that happening, with the digital electricity, if you will, or the pulse electricity and stuff, it's a whole different world. But how we get classified started a long time ago. So back in 2004, I don't know if you remember this, but we were very successful in working with the Construction Specification Institute and creating our own Division 27 and 28. I don't know if you remember that, but that was the start of everything.
Yeah, because we created kind of this rogue division prior to that.
Right, right. So we were underneath Division 16 at the time because there was really only 16 divisions. We created 17 just because we wanted one, right? But back in the day, it's been 20 years ago now, is our industry, NSCA, myself, we got very involved in creating this unique identity, this separate scope of work for system integrators. So we created the three-part specifications for the work that we do, the scope of work that we do for an integrator. And now it allows us within 27, which is the communications division, 28 is security, life safety, but it allows us to be more active and more involved with direct relationships with the key end users, the building owners, the GCs, and starting at that point, we're not defined as a third tier sub underneath the electrical anymore or anything like that. So our ability to win and or lose projects were based on our performance and the things that we do and the things that the building needed at the time. All of that has advanced to the point where the National Electrical Code and other things have followed, and standards and compliance has followed that pathway to where we've created this unique division, if you will, and this unique scope of work that's outside of any other trade. And that's what's made this such an interesting and exciting path for the systems integrators, is that we're an industry all of our own now, and now we have the classifications within the NEC all to our own, which is great.
So, who are the, or could be called the traditional low voltage contractors and integrators?
Well,
The all encompassing.
you would describe them by way of code as limited energy technology solution providers, probably, or system integrators. So we're working right now on creating the North American Industry Classification standards, the standard occupation classifications, and then what the insurance industry looks at us for, what our workers' comp mod rate should be and all that kind of stuff. So the people that perform the scope of work that we do, be it security, fire, access, surveillance, audiovisual, communications, paging, anything that is deemed communications, security, and life safety, falls underneath this Division 27 and 28, and that is really how we're identifying those. I think there's like 27 different key subsystems within communications and security life safety that are defined by this class 2, class 3, and what will soon be class 4 work results within the code, if you will.
Yeah, because POE has been traditionally kind of like class 2, can also be class 3. So, where do the structured cabling folks fall in this?
Yeah, so they're part of the class 2, class 3, Division 27, 28 domain. So the infrastructure, the digital infrastructure, the network. So if you look at wireless access points, you look at hubs and routers and gateways and the servers and all of the things that will allow us by way of Ethernet. We're able to provide a companion, pair of wires within the jacket that is providing power to the endpoints that we're using. And so they are part of this, the communication infrastructure is part of this domain that we're talking about for system integrators.
Yeah, with POE plus plus now, 90 watts at the source. I mean,
Yes.
but
So that
NSCA has been, sorry, go ahead.
I was just going to say with POE, it started out as one thing, and then it's like, okay, now wait a minute, we can power up more devices if we bump up the conductor size and add more, power to that, and look at the safe way of doing that. And what happened was POE LED lighting has driven this whole it's a complication, or it's sometimes kind of a competitive push between those that do power and lighting and those that do the other technical systems that are PoE enabled, right? So now as we get more capacity of what we can do with the PoE plus and PoE plus plus, is that allows us to for instance with LED lighting, we can illuminate an entire room just through the output of the power provided through the category cable that goes to the fixtures. So you're plugging in RJ45 jacks into devices where we once had to run conduit and THHN and Romex and all these things that added immensely to the cost of tacking on remote devices to even like surveillance cameras, for example. I can't remember the last time that a surveillance camera in a remote, like the building, let's say a school, where we put them on the corners or down the hallways or whatever. I can't remember the last time we've run power circuits to that, 120 volt AC power circuits to that, because we can do that all on PoE now. It's just innovation has driven that change.
Yeah, and it seems like the kind of tug or fight over traditional low voltage and traditional electricians is this idea of lighting and how it's powered. You know, the electricians are seeing us kind of intrude on their lighting space, and we're thinking about, hey, how can we get into lighting? So there seems to be this, I don't want to say battle because that's a strong word there, but as far as the legislative efforts, and I've seen NSCA track legislation since well before POE. You've been doing this for years. Um, so some of these legislative efforts, how could they like negatively impact the low voltage contractor? Have you got some examples of kind of the proposed legislation that could be problematic for us? And what kind of restrictions would it place on us?
Yeah, so one resource we have is if you go to nsca.org, our website, and then go to advocacy and then look at track legislation, you'll see hundreds of bills that we're monitoring on a regular basis that many of them, there's a bar there that says licensing, permits, I think, or compliance, code issues, legislative. So we monitor those. Like there's one right now in Colorado we were just talking about this morning that excludes. We're either trying to write good legislation around class 2, class 3 wiring where we can do that through licensure, that we would be kind of leading the charge on that. The industry would lead what it would take to get an individual or a company license. Or in many cases, about half the states, we have exemptions to electrical licensing that serves us real well too. So in Colorado, for example, is we have a really good exemption for class 2, class 3, where we don't have to be licensed as an electrical contractor. What our job is at NSCA is to preserve that for the benefit of the system integrator. So all the time we're looking at these bills, we're looking at, can we influence the lawmaker who may have, inadvertently, written a bill that would prevent us from doing what we do as technology providers. And then we, talk to them about safety and math and physics and all the things that make what we do, practical in the buildings and stuff.
Yeah, I think that's been traditionally called the limited energy exemption as far as licensure. Um, if some of these legislative efforts are successful in requiring further licensing, what kind of products is this going to affect?
Well, pretty much, it depends. There's states like Pennsylvania and New Jersey that have written. There's bills that pop up every year. It's like a whack-a-mole game. But those two states, you can count on them in every legislative session having someone introduce a bill that would say you need to be a licensed electrician to do work on anything over 10 volts.
Yeah,
So basically, that would say we can change out a 9-volt battery, I guess, ourselves, but we can't work on, think about everything over 10 volts. That's USB. It's everything that we do. So if you have a bill like that, our job is to go in and explain to them that whoever helped them write that, or whoever influenced the writing of that bill, they're trying to use what we call regulatory capture, which means that they exclude thinking about science and math and safety and all the things that we know are legitimate within the POE world, and they're trying to say that only this person through this type of training and licensing can do that work. Which, when you think about the work of an integrator, we know how the network works. We know our conductor size and limitations. We know how all these devices can work on a network. We know LAN segmentation. We know VLANs. We know how to create a firewall that keeps people out of there that shouldn't be on that network. We know how to protect it. We know how to do all the IP addresses and all the things that you need to do in the world of digital audio video systems and security and life safety. So you've got this industry, the industry that NSCA represents and our consortium partners, and you've got another industry that's looking at, oh my gosh, this stuff is going away. The work that we do is changing and going away because it can be done over Ethernet and PoE circuits and stuff. And so there's a constant battle in the legislative arena that we represent the integrators to protect and defend their scope of work within that division 27 and 28. That's what we do.
Yeah, the way I've seen it is basically it seems to be a battle over who gets to wire the building.
And it's changing. So when and I'm very empathetic with how the electrical world has changed. If you're an electrical contractor, you got to think about, okay, because of LED lighting, because of PoE, because that camera doesn't need an AC circuit out there anymore, what's that doing? It's shrinking their scope of work, and it's adding a whole lot of scope of work to the low voltage, as you say, or the limited energy integrator. And so they have to be thinking about, well, do they then jump into the low voltage limited energy environment, or do
And a
they?
lot of them are working on that.
Yeah, yeah, a lot of them do, and some have, some of them they're licensed that way anyway if they have to be, and others are defined by their trade jurisdiction within their union collective bargaining agreements and stuff. So there's a lot of it really swings depending on the right to work states and the non-right to work states, the union environment, the non-union, construction or non-construction. So an integrator that doesn't really work in new construction or renovations, licensing isn't as big a deal to them as our members that are out on that job site every day. Then it's a huge deal, you know.
Yeah. Because, there's power over Ethernet, there's power over HD-base-T, which is very similar to PoE. So this is getting down to, at some point, if the regulations become too onerous, we can't even run PoE to a PTZ camera.
Right.
And we can't even connect an HDMI extender.
Right. And we do it every day, right? So
Yeah.
so think about the NSCA members in Pennsylvania, New Jersey, New York, or any state that would have a license that says you can't perform that work unless you're a licensed electrician. Well, they do that every day. I mean, they're plugging in, you know, remote cameras. They're doing like a conferencing room. Any kind of a device like that. They're doing security, access control. All of the access control devices now, the card readers and stuff, they're PoE enabled, and that's more than 9 volts or whatever. So it's very, very confusing, and it's unmonitored. So you can do this all day long, and there's no real compliance officer that would say don't do that unless you're on a job site. And when you're on the job site, the AHJ, the authority having jurisdiction, that's when licensure becomes real. That's when it gets real in many cases. And then our job, what our job at NSCA is to help the integrator know the code. We talk about it all the time. They have to know the code. And I tell you what, is that the integrator, whether we put in our proposals that others are responsible for things, the AHJ does not care. If he wants to go and look at UL stickers, if he wants to look at your license, if he wants to inspect that job in the way that and my big thing is removal of abandoned cable. So a systems integrator, by way of the code, is responsible. They are the responsible party for the removal or proper tagging of abandoned cable. A lot of integrators, not NSCA members, but a lot of the other ones, let's say, they don't understand the code well enough to know that that's the obligation of them in a renovation, is to remove abandoned cable for systems that aren't used anymore. They put in their quote something like, it's going to be the responsibility of others to remove and tag abandoned cable. Well, the HJ don't care. You're going to end up doing it, whether you put that in your quote or not. So we have a whole learning thing that we got to do here, Tom, as far as educating the industry on current and future license. And when in this new version of the electrical code, it's going to be major about changes that are happening.
Yeah. Because that gets published, I guess it's the 2023 version, 26 cycle. Yeah, because it gets updated every 3 years. And this is one of the things, as spent my time as a senior designer, I've taught audiovisual design for years. One of my big things for designers is get to know the code. Because, you've got things that you need to specify for audiovisual infrastructure, and you need to be able to specify that per code and do it correctly so that you get what's needed on site and it can pass and it does all, so that the whoever's, electrical contractor putting in your conduit, for example, if it's not the code, you're not going to get what you think you need. So you might as well get up to speed on the code.
I agree. And what's problematic about the code is which code, so you got the fire code, you got the NEC, you've got building egress, you've got all the different codes and compliance things that we talk about all the time. But every state can adopt a different version of the
Right.
electrical code. We have, I think it was Indiana or some state that was clear back to the 2012 code or something. So they until they appropriate money for the AHJs to get trained, they'll stick with the code that they got. And so Texas was way in the rears on that, and others where the 23 code has been adopted by many states. As soon as it comes out, it's their, desire to go with the latest version. And the newer the code, the better it is for the integrators in most cases, because we have written better language for class 2 and class 3, and then what we follow up with is either a practical license, a limited energy license in each state that's relevant to what we do, or we adapt the exemptions to the licenses in each state. But there's no there's no real standard out there. There's not a national acceptance of the code based on
Right.
the.
It has to be that version has to be adopted by the local jurisdiction, and they can modify it however they see fit. And then you have the problem the AHJ can ignore all of that totally and require something that's not even in the code.
So we publish a thing called the Guide to State Licensing. So every couple years we update this, and it's a big project to go state by state, and we talk to our members about in each one. It's a state by state document, and so exactly what the code cycle is. What the exemption or what the licensing provisions are in that state, and so that's going great. But all of a sudden, municipalities like New York and Houston and several others have adopted their own ordinances or permitting processes and things that kind of fly in the face of what the code says. And so we have to then go city by city almost, or in some cases counties. Like in Maryland, they have different ordinances in different counties in Maryland, and so you have to dig deep into that before you decide to bid on a project. So I always tell our members is call me before you bid a project outside of your normal domain or your normal territory. Call me. Like if you're not from Nevada or Las Vegas and you want to bid a project in Las Vegas and you're not in state, call me before you bid that project rather than call me after you got thrown off the job.
Yeah.
I can help you out and talk you out of bidding that project and just working with someone
Yeah, because
locally.
places like Vegas in particular has very restriction, a lot of restrictions on code. Everything's going to be in conduit regardless. So,
And you have to have brick and mortar. You have to have a location there in order to do the pre-bid filings and become on the bidders list. A lot of and especially the AV integrators, what they'll do is they think, well, it's just a small project. I'll be in and out, and so I won't have to register on that project or deal with prevailing wage or any of these other things that tend to bite us. And so they get there, and within 2 hours of being on the job site, somebody knows they're there. And so that's when we get the call about, hey, what can I do to finish this project? Because I just got thrown off of it. And it's like if you'd have called, a month ago, I would have talked you out of even bidding on that project. And in Hawaii, and in here, and there's several places where if you're not from there, you shouldn't really go there.
yeah,
So
and this is
less.
this is the thing about regulations in general with me is regulations tend to increase. They don't tend to go away. And I'll give an example. Um, I had heard this and I checked it out for myself. This is in Rhode Island. It says new law prohibits home inspectors from opening electrical panels effective January 30, 25. And this is off the Rhode Island Realtors website. New law will prohibit anyone but a licensed electrician from opening electrical panels and performing other inspections that home inspectors have been required to perform, such as inserting a receptacle tester into a wall plug. They can't even plug a tester into an outlet. That's how restrictive it is. And
Yeah, good. If you go to the NSCA legislative page and you look at Rhode Island, Massachusetts, and in certain states like that, you'll see all sorts of proposed bills that would say things like that. And it's like, okay, now we can't even plug in a light fixture. What are we doing here?
well, that gets into if this continues to go on, we can't plug anything in on site. And that's my concern. You
The
know,
good news is, the good news is, Tom, is you've got NSCA and our consortium partners. So Bixie, NSCA, CEDIA, ESA, AVIXA, on and on and on. We've got this team of trade associations that every Friday, we just got off the call, every Friday we get together and we talk about this, and then we see who the bill sponsor was, we see what their motivation might have been, we talk to them, we try to get them to kill the bill or rewrite the language or to, exempt, carve out what we do. I tell you what, if we had more time, I'd tell you about this right to repair stuff that's out there right now. So right to repair was, it was a good idea. This I call this legislative session the year of good intentions followed up with unintended consequences. And so right to repair was all about people who wanted to change the battery in their iPhone or fix their screen
right.
themselves, as well as
Or work on their John Deere tractor.
farmers working on their
Yes.
John Deere tractors.
Yes.
So great idea. Makes no sense why you can't do those things yourself, let's say. But these sweeping right to repair bills, Oregon is the worst right now. The sweeping right to repair bills that are out there doesn't exclude anything other than it is just anything that's out there, you have the right to repair it. Now imagine being in a hospital and the somebody in the hospital decides that the fire alarm isn't working or their nurse call's not working or their RTLS isn't working or whatever. That's the last thing you want to do is have someone that's not authorized by the manufacturer, certified, understanding what they're doing. You don't want them inside of a device changing out a power supply or changing a configuration or doing anything like that. And so we've been really successful, except for Oregon so far, we've been really successful in talking to lawmakers about how mission critical life safety systems and other things of that nature need to be excluded. The Texas bill that came out today, it has an exclusion for business to business now. So it's taking and getting the lawmakers to rethink what they wrote about consumer stuff and really excluding the business to business. But our industry needs watchdogs like what we're doing to make sure that these bills don't get passed in the way that they've been written by people who had great intentions, but they don't realize the unintended consequences of what they're doing.
Which kind of leads me into one of my next questions. What can the low voltage integrator do now to be proactive? You've mentioned your website. I brought it up there for a moment. But what else can they do? They need to get involved with the advocacy page on NSCA, obviously.
And support your trade associations, I would say. So if you're doing residential, you belong to CEDIA, let's say, or you're security and you belong to NSCA or the Security Industry Association or the Electronic Security Association, do AV, AVIXA. If you're IT, spend time with Bixie or participate in Bixie sessions. All the integrators that belong to NSCA, we inundate them with this, but it's super important to follow what the association's advocacy role is, what their public policy things are. Like right now, we're monitoring, I think it's like 400 bills, hundreds of them. And it's a lot of them have to do with regulations and unnecessary permitting and ordinances. And there's bills that are brought forward just because a constituent got to a lawmaker and they wanted to do a regulatory capture for their particular business, which then prevents others from, competing on merit and skill and so on. But beyond that, we have to watch this right to repair. It is not good in most every instance unless we get in there and carve out what we do. Taxes on services is a big deal. So we monitor, labor was always, and services was always excluded. What our members need to know about that is before they bid on something and there's labor involved, do they have to include a sales or usage tax in that? So that's an important thing. And then just look at all of the cyber security requirements and the credentialing around that, and AI and the restrictions to AI. And there's so many more regulations that you'll see on our site. So we're working on that. And then simultaneously, we have a big effort right now to upgrade the system integrator with the NIAC, so the North American Industry Classification System, along with the standard occupation,
Right, right.
and then the
We have not
insurance.
had, we've not had our own classification.
No, so what we're doing, and these things only come up like every 7 years or whatever, but just earlier in the week we filed revisions to that include more of the scope of work of the technology integrator. So we're trying to get that aligned so that we have proper definitions for our workers' compensation or in our business insurance, and making sure that all of the things that we do are we're being properly classified. There's so many laws about prevailing wage. A big thing we
Right.
fight all the time is prevailing wage. Prevailing wage is getting scope creep, if you will, to where they're trying to, not us, of course, but others are trying to say that prevailing wage should be inclusive of things beyond the job site. So let's say that you are staging equipment or prefabrication of your racks back at your office. What they're trying to do, and what we're fighting, is that it shouldn't be part of the prevailing wage, because the Davis-Bacon Act was written around just the activities that happen at the job site. And so, so we're constantly saying that it doesn't address, like if you're building, say you're in New York City putting a job in, that's prevailing wage. That's great. So our people get paid prevailing wage. But if your racks are being fabricated in some other state or some other location, we've always been excluded from that on prevailing wage certified payroll. So that's why we do it. It's more efficient to do it somewhere else, and then you ship them, somewhat assembled to the job site. Well, that's all being contested now too. So NSCA is battling that in most every state, it
That's
seems.
interesting
And then,
because I was on
oh
the
yeah,
I was on the NSCA website before we got on the call and looked at specifically my state, which is Virginia, and I saw a lot of bills on
oh
there
yeah,
with wording with prevailing wage. There were
yeah. And
quite a number of them.
what's funny about Virginia? I get a kick out of it almost, is that it's like there's two states there almost. There's Northern
Mhm.
Virginia and there's Southern Virginia. And so when you see a bill about,
And I have lived in both. I can tell you
okay,
about it.
so you know what I'm talking about. There's some fine line there somewhere. But what happens is in Virginia, we'll see a bill pop up that is written about, hey, let's expand prevailing wage and cover people that even drive stuff to and from the job site and all that kind of thing. And then all of a sudden, you'll see another bill pop up the next week where let's abandon prevailing wage throughout the state. Let's get rid of it entirely. So when one political faction submits one bill, another one will submit just the opposite of that, and then they battle it out, and generally they all don't make it even to a vote. They get tossed out. So it's just an interesting state, but there's always a lot of legislation in Virginia that we deal with.
Yeah, and if you've ever lived in Northern Virginia, somebody asks where you're from, you tell them Northern Virginia. You don't say Virginia. You specifically say Northern Virginia. And I'm actually in Southwest Virginia now. But yes, I have done both, and I get it. So things I've heard so far: get involved with your relevant trade association. There is the advocacy part of the NSCA website where you can actually see the bills and stuff that are popped up. I would also say get to know your local legislator so that you can start having conversations with them and they get to know you and what you do and everything else. Um, Besides that, what are some other things that we can do to protect ourselves?
Well, I think I think most of our members would agree that we're not electricians. We're not people that put in we don't go outside and get to the poles. We're not working on 220. We're not doing anything on the getting the power landed to the work that we do. We're on the load side of that transformer, if you will. So what we want to do is to be able to have an environment and an industry that we can do what we do without unnecessary regulations. Now, certainly safety is key. Super important. Certainly, us abiding by the law. Once it is law, we encourage all of our members to abide by that law. So if something does get past us or something gets passed somewhere and we disagree with it, we still have to abide by it. So we coach them on that. But I would say pay particular attention to the upcoming code cycle that we're in, and also pay particular attention to prevailing wage, the impact of prevailing wage if it were to expand, to be thinking about how that changes the people that work for you, or if licensure in your state requires journeyman electricians and you don't have them, think about how that would apply. And like right now, there is a big push for more regulation, as you've seen. Now, I don't know in our current political environment if that will now swing back the other way. So that's what we monitor is it has gone really heavy towards more and more regulations. So I don't know if it's going to stay that way. Like you said before, usually once it gets there, it stays there. But
And it tends to
it's hard.
expand. Yeah.
Yeah, it's hard to say. But when we think about safety, we think about energy saving, think about material cost savings and labor efficiencies. Power over Ethernet is here to stay. I mean, I can't remember the last time there's been 120 volt AC run to a surveillance camera or an access control device or anything like that. So if there's no need to have that power, we're not going to put that out there anymore, because we can do it so much more efficiently and with fewer building materials and things like that. It's just we don't need that extra cost anymore, and innovation has quite simply just changed things.
Yeah, and if you think having a tech on site is expensive, try having a electrician as part of your staff on site.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, yeah. So I
Good
would
electricians,
just
yeah, good electricians are in short supply, and then you want to have one on your staff. Just so
Yeah,
you
and
can
then that's
pull permanent.
that's the confusing. Think about this. I saw a report the other day come out from the DOL that the age of an average journeyman electrician is like 56 or 57 years old right now, and you can't find one anywhere, right? But
Right.
yet they're trying to regulate the system integrators from doing low voltage work, where if they got their way, you couldn't get somebody to do it anyway. And then there's a whole different training element involved in this thing. So it just doesn't make any sense.
Yeah,
So
and this goes back to the Rhode Island thing I mentioned a little
yeah,
while ago. If you want to get your home inspected, now you have the electrical part of it anyway. You have to go
yeah,
find a licensed electrician, and you only have like 10 days to get this done.
yeah. I know it. It doesn't make any sense. But I would just say, for our you know system integrator friends out there, is know the code. Just you got to be the responsible party on project closeouts and inspections. You've got to know the code. You got to be able to talk about it. Your project managers, your technicians that are there for project closeout, they have to know the codes and the permitting process. And you can't go in and mess that up, because you'll never work with that general contractor owner again if you're the one that's holding up the inspection because you forgot to file the right permits or pull a permit on the
Yeah,
job yourself. We can't be like that. We got to be a professional, you know code knowledgeable entity out there on these project sites.
I've long been a proponent of don't rely on what somebody else says is code. Get to know the code yourself. Um, Either have your own personal copy of the code, or at least have access to it at your shop. One of the two, but
Hmm.
get to know it. It's boring reading. It's frustrating,
It's awful.
but you need to know it.
Absolutely.
Well, Chuck, I really appreciate your time today. I would say this is kind of if you're not involved yet, kind of a warning shot that you need to be, so that we can continue to do the things that we do.
Yeah, I think so. And just stay in tune with all of this. And then every once in a while, you'll get an email from NSCA that says action alert. And what that action alert is that we've spotted a bill in your state. Like you may see something about Virginia. You'll get an email from us and says, hey, we would like you to reach out to your local lawmakers and see if you can influence them changing the language in this bill from just in a word or two off or a number here or there. And we send that out. So many of our members don't do that. They get the action alert. They're like, "Oh crap," and they support us entirely. But we need boots on the ground that would be willing to call people and say, "Hey, that bill is very detrimental to our business, and before you vote yes on that, or before you run it through committee, can you change these words?" And we have real good success in that if our members get involved.
Yeah, and that's you're too busy trying to get this job done, and then you've got this alert that comes in. Well, if you don't pay attention to the alert, then eventually you're not going to have the work to do.
That's
Kind
right.
of how I would look
That's
at it.
right. Yeah.
Well, Chuck, again, I really appreciate your time today. It's been so good to get together. Really enjoyed the conversation. Thank you so much.
Well, thanks for having me. And if anybody wants to talk code all day, I can talk this stuff all day long. So if anybody has questions about that, reach out to Tom or myself here, and love to answer those questions.
All right. Thanks again. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.